Okay. Hello again. Thanks for braving the rain to come back to class. Last time we spoke at length about the phenomenon of maximum grip, which is roughly the tendency to maintain equilibrium and poise in our perceptual relation to things. But at the same time, he includes this part of it that says we're related to things and their properties as a norm that we can get a better or worse perspective on, a better or worse view of. And that leads him to this interesting phrase on page 319 that we spent a long time trying to sort out, that says in the middle of the page, the real color remains beneath appearances, just as the background continues beneath the figure. That is, not as a quality that is seen or conceived, but rather as a non-sensorial presence. And I added to that a non-sensorial, indeterminate presence. This goes back to themes he introduced in the first few pages of the book, where on page 7 he says, we must recognize the indeterminate as a positive phenomenon. And the indeterminate then has to do with the way the background is present to us, but non-focally. How is the background present to us? He goes through a lot of work to try to say the background's present to us in that we have a bodily set or a bodily sense that if we explore the object or go around to its other side, it will continue to present more of its faces to us. That if we grab it with our hand, it will be prepared to support our grip. So we have a bodily sense of this indeterminacy. It kind of helps guide our perceptual relations to things. And he uses that as a way to explain, in a very creative, mind-boggling way, as a way to explain the constancy phenomena, that unevenly lit surfaces don't show up to us as unevenly colored, but show up to us as the same color but unevenly lit. So that's what we spent a lot of time trying to wrap our heads around. I want to read you again the key passage about maximum grip, which is back in the space chapter on page 261. My body is geared into the world when my perception provides me the most varied and most clearly articulated spectacle possible, and when my motor intentions, as they unfold, receive the responses they anticipate from the world. This maximum of clarity and perception and action, now there's that and, perception and action, specifies a perceptual ground, a background for my life. That's really important. He's being very careful there that he says that maximum of clarity and motor intentional responsiveness we have with our environment, it's a background. It's not something, the maximum he's saying here is never something we actually ever achieve. We're always kind of tending towards it. And that's why perception is this ongoing unfolding of getting more obscure to more clarity, tripping to gaining your poise. Your perceptual experience throughout the day is always adjusting itself to the particular conditions of your situation. And most of this happens beneath your awareness. Your body is attuned to the perspectival variations and all the things that are happening when you're regaining your balance, when you're walking down the path. All of this is happening because your body is naturally oriented to maintaining a maximum grip. And so this is one of the key moves throughout the whole book, and he uses it to explain all kinds of stuff. And so far, we've seen him do the color constancy. I'm not going to go back over that in any more detail than I just did. That's just to catch us up to where we are. The things I want to do today are what he says about two more aspects of perceptual constancy and perceptual stability. Did you have any luck? Would you mind calling the number? Because we're going to need a battery delivered, I think. Maybe somebody can bring one. That's a really good question. The question was, how does his story about being oriented toward a maximum grip relate to his claim in the beginning of the book that we have to return to the phenomena? Roughly, the outline of the answer is that he thinks the phenomena of perceptual experience really are the domain of the real phenomena of perceptual experience is this domain of being oriented towards being an organism tending towards equilibrium in its perceptual environment in a way that draws on your bodily skills, bypasses your mind, bypasses all of the things that traditional philosophy has always emphasized: associations, projection of memories, following rules, that your body and your body schema and your skills as an embodied organism enable you to react and respond to perceptual phenomena so that you naturally can reach out and grab something even though you only see its front side, so that you perceive stable objects even though they have a constantly varying perspective as you move around them. So his idea is like, that's the range of the phenomena. What's the body doing in its immersion, perspectival immersion in a context with this orientation towards stability and equilibrium? He's calling that the phenomena. He's saying all of that's been covered up, totally overlooked by the tradition. The tradition that has always started out, especially since Descartes, by saying what we really can have first-person acquaintance with, what we really know, what we can really philosophize about, is what's going on in our mind. And what's special about being human is what our mind does. The body is just a bunch of stuff. The mind is where rationality is. The mind, moreover, it turns out, it depends who you ask, but in this tradition, the mind is also where emotions are. It's where ideas are. The mind is where the action is, according to traditional philosophy. And so they try to explain everything by some recourse to the mind. Merleau-Ponty says if you're always thinking about what's going on in the mind, you're going to overlook the phenomena. And you're always having the tradition as well, an analytical perspective. They start from the perspective of somebody who is reflecting on their experience, who's saying, who's breaking up the holism of the perceptual field that organizes itself in front of us and says, no, what we really need to get to are the basic elements of perceptual experience. That's what's really perception. It's these basic isolated elements. And then we have to explain how the basic isolated elements get built up into a coherent perceptual experience. That's the traditional view. And so he says, let's not start with that. Let's not start with an emphasis on reflection and analytical attention. Let's start from the perspective of somebody who's going around in the world doing things. Someone who's walking down a city street, dodging people who are walking and texting without having to think about it, avoiding the person who always wants to stop and chat because you're in a hurry, knowing right when you have to speed up because there's a little opening in front of the people in front of you. You have this really refined capacity for moving around and perceiving things that happens when you're in an involvement, not when you're sitting back and calculating and thinking. That's his view. And so the maximum grip story is a way to say what's doing all the work, in a sense, that the tradition thinks the mind is doing. In a way, Merleau-Ponty is saying it's the body schema and its tendency toward maximum grip. That's where the magic happens. Does that make sense? You're welcome. Any other questions about that, what we were just saying, or comments, passing thoughts? All right, we'll keep it cooking. If you have something else to say about it, I'd be happy to hear it. And I'm going to say more about that general picture in the end of the lecture when we get to his initially strange-sounding views of the correlation between the body and the world. So, there's two other things we need to discuss before we get there. The first one is what he calls the organization of the field as a whole. Because remember, part of his view that he says on the very beginning of the book that Page 4. The perceptual something is always in the middle of some other thing. It always belongs to a field. So we're always seeing things from the perspective, the limited perspective of our body that presents us things, some things in front of other things. We're not God outside of the world looking down on it from no place in particular. We're not a disembodied spectator. We're embodied from a limited point of view, and that means some things are in front of other things for us. There's figures and there's backgrounds, and there's figures intermingling with other figures. So in the way that the field itself, the perceptual field itself, plays a role in our perception of color constancy and shape constancy is what he wants to talk about now. We're really color constancy. So I'm going to go on page 320. Page 320, a little bit below where it says the 361 in the margin. This is where he's starting to show you that for the color constancy phenomenon to work, it matters how the whole perceptual field is showing up together. It's the way that the different things in the field together, including the lighting, make a difference to how the qualities are perceived. So here he says, I'm looking for a sentence that says, if we look at two plates under unequal lighting. Oh, no, sorry. This is from a different essay. Let me just read this to you. This is from an essay he wrote at the same time as this, that's published in the book Sense and Nonsense. It's actually the essay he wrote about the perception of cinema, called The Film and the New Psychology. That essay is really cool because it has a 6-page, condensed, clear introduction to the whole project of the phenomenology of perception. And then it goes on to explain what that has to do with our perception of narrative cinema. I wrote a paper about it that is on the internet somewhere. And I would also send it to you if you're interested. He says there, if we look at two plates under unequal lighting, they will appear as equally white and unequally lit, as long as the light source figures in the visual field. So you have to kind of imagine this. You've got two plates, and they are under unequal lighting. So this one's got a little bit of shadow on it, and this one's got less shadow on it. But he says they will appear to be equally white. The assumption here is that they're both white plates. And he says they're going to look equally white and unequally lit as long as you see the light source in the picture. So your perceptual system is taking account of the fact of the light source and how the light is illuminating them. This is part of his really fascinating idea of how lighting operates as a perceptual background. We don't pay attention to the lighting, the illumination in the room. We pay attention to how it's enabling colors to show up. It functions as a background. It leads our gaze to the colors. That's why it has that same function as the indeterminate background against which we perceive things in colors. So if we look at two plates under unequal lighting, they will appear equally white and unequally lit, as long as the light source figures in the visual field. If we observe the same plates with the same play of light through a hole in a screen that blocks out the lighting source, so now imagine you're looking at them in a box, and you can't see that anymore. Then he says, one will appear gray and the other one will appear white. So the one in more shadow will look like it's gray. So you've broken up the phenomenon of color constancy, in other words. So that experiment shows, he says, that the color constancy phenomenon depends upon the way we take account of the lighting context. And if you screen out the light, then the constancy phenomenon breaks down, and they don't look to be equally white but unequally lit. Instead, they look to be different colors, gray and white. He has a few more examples of that, so just cook that for a second, and let me read another page. Oh, cool, thanks. So here, now I'm going back to 320. I don't know if I understand this first one, but let's just try. A blue piece of paper appears blue in gaslight. And yet, examining it with a photometer, we are surprised to notice that it sends to the eye the same mixture of rays as a brown piece of paper seen in the daylight. I don't know what to do with that, so let's just skip it. The next sentence is the one I wanted to read. A white wall that is weakly illuminated, which appears in spontaneous vision as white, given the stipulations made above, I don't know what that means, appears gray-blue if we see it through the window of a screen that hides the light source from us. He's making the same point again. I don't know if I had the details of that example clear in my mind, but the point is the same, that if your perceptual system can take account of the lighting source, then the color constancy is maintained. If the lighting source is obscured from view, the constancy phenomenon breaks down and you see different colors rather than the same color unequally lit. Now, if you just jump over to 321, right below the middle of the page, he says, the decisive factor in the phenomenon of constancy that the screen puts out of play, in other words, this is the screen, you're screening out the light source, that the screen puts out of play, and that can be a factor in free vision, is the articulation of the whole field, the richness and sharpness of its structure. So there's something to do that we take account of the whole perceptual field. We're not like microscopes, or we don't go around with a toilet paper tube looking at stuff. That's what the traditional philosophers think that we do, that we're always kind of analytical machines, breaking things down into their component parts. He wants to say, no, we're attuned to the whole. And our attunement to the whole perceptual scene, including how the lighting figures into it, is what enables us to be attuned to the real colors and to have the color constancy phenomenon. Let's see if this quote makes it any more clear. On 322, on the bottom of the top paragraph, thus the connection between the phenomenon of constancy, the articulation of the field, and the phenomenon of lighting can be considered as an established fact. Well, I don't know about that, but he wants it to be an established fact, that the constancy phenomenon depends upon our taking into account the whole perceptual field and not presuming an analytical breaking apart of the Gestalt whole. Okay, we're going to see that in more detail as we talk more about the lighting context. So I'm going to move into that next segment. We've already been talking about it and trying to explain this. The way that the lighting figures in by leading our gaze, helping us attune to the colors that we're in touch with, and enabling us to maintain the color constancy phenomenon and see them as unequally lit as opposed to being different colors. This is part of his deep and unique conception of the background, of the indeterminate background, and of how an indeterminate background plays a positive role in allowing us to perceive as we do. So we need to make a distinction between light as a visual object and light as a background whose withdrawal allows objects and their colors to be seen as constant. So you can imagine if you're in the movie theater and the lights go down at first. Try this, especially when they first go down and it gets really dark and then the projector comes on. If you're over on the side, you can look up and you can see the cone of light shooting out from the projector and it hits the screen. So that's where you can see the cone of light. You're looking at light as an object. You're taking it as a foreground object in your perceptual field. You're not letting your gaze be led to where it's showing you, to the screen. Instead, you're taking the light itself as an object. In that case, it's a perceptual object and it's not part of the perceptual background. We need to keep that in mind. So he's saying lighting, though, must remain in the background to do its work of leading us to see the color constancy phenomenon. It can't be as a focal object of awareness if it's going to do its job of revealing colors and shapes to us. Let's see, I have a quote here on 323. Yeah, on 323 in the bottom of the top paragraph. Lighting and reflection only play their role if they fade into the background as discrete intermediaries, and if they direct our gaze rather than arresting it. So the way that the lighting functions as a background is that it directs your gaze. It leads you to see. You don't pay attention to it. You're paying attention to what it helps reveal to you. That's, again, the indeterminacy of the background playing a normative role. It's the same kind of thing where he says the background of the object is present in a way that it solicits you to grab the water bottle, even though if you're an analytical thinker, you're only given light rays from the surface, so you only see a flat surface. But the background is indeterminately present because it's available to you, guiding you, soliciting you to grab the whole water bottle. Just as the background behind me is available for you to walk around and see it, you won't be surprised when you get around to the other side. He's saying the lighting solicits us, guides our gaze. What's your name? Zane? Cool. Yes. Yeah, because the normal lighting in the room, I guess when they kill the lights, we lose the... Yes. Yeah, there's a distinction. Again, I have to apologize to all French speakers in the world, but there's a distinction in French between the lumière and the éclairage. This is the words he's using. And the lumière is light as an object. When we kill the lights in the theater and the projector goes on, and we see it as a light cone going across the room, we take it as a perceptual object. He calls that the light. And the éclairage he calls the lighting, or the lighting context, and that's when it's functioning as the indeterminate background. And for the movie example to work, I think this is what you're saying. The éclairage in the background's got to be annihilated, and then it can show up as an object. Any follow-up on that? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Good. Anyone else want to say something? What's your name again? Sean. I presume that he should also be able to make that argument. I don't know if he actually bothers to do it. I don't think he does. But look, he's got this weird section that I'm not planning to say anything about, called the constancy of sounds, temperatures, and weights, the constancy of tactile experiences and movement. Well, I welcome you to see if he's got an account in there. I don't know if he does. He owes us one, and he should be able to give one. But I don't know if he can. I don't know if he does. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a helpful excuse for him to not give the account. But it makes sense. Yeah. It works for me. So the lighting guides your gaze. This is a quote from what Sean Kelly says in his paper on seeing things. He says, if asked to determine the color of a table or a wall, your eyes will move automatically to the part of its surface where the lighting is best. That's another way of saying that the lighting directs your gaze, guides you to be in contact with the real colors, or the colors as constant. Then he's got this really funny example in the next paragraph on 323. But what should we conclude from this? Now he's going to give you this metaphor of sorts to explain how the lighting guides you. If I'm led through an unfamiliar apartment towards its owner, I guess you have to think there's a greeter. Somebody greets you at the door and leads you into the apartment to the owner. If I'm led through an unfamiliar apartment towards its owner, there's someone who knows on my behalf, someone to whom the unfolding of the spectacle offers a sense and moves towards its goal. I entrust myself or lend myself to this knowledge that I do not possess. For him, the apartment's unfamiliar. He doesn't know what room's next. He doesn't know what sculpture is on the other side of the couch. He's kind of being blindly led, but there's someone who knows more about the room than he does, and he allows himself to be guided. He wants to say, like, lighting is the butler of your vision. When I am shown a detail of a landscape that I don't know how to distinguish on my own, there's someone here who has already seen, who already knows where to stand and where one must look to see the detail. I guess you're up on the top of the hill and a friend of yours sees a cool rock formation on the hill 300 meters away. They say, check it out, and they point it out to you, and your gaze follows their pointing. So he's saying that's the kind of thing that lighting does. It shows you where to look, but it has to remain in the background in order to do so. Now he says the punchline. The lighting directs my gaze and leads me to see the object. So in one sense, it knows and sees the object. I'm skipping down like 6 lines. Reciprocally, our own vision does nothing but take up for itself and follow out the encompassing of the spectacle through the pathways traced out for it by the lighting. We perceive according to light, just as in verbal communication we think according to others. Well, he starts to multiply his metaphors and similes, and sometimes they can be more confusing than clarifying. The point is that the lighting becomes a neutral background, and we see and are attuned to colors because we allow our gaze to be guided by it. It functions as an indeterminate normative background for our perception, rather than as an object. So now we can move to the next phase of his arguments. On 324, he's connecting it back to our body. That's always going to be the move. In order for the lighting to do its job and withdrawal to the background, it depends on what your body is doing and where you're bodily located. Because what's neutral light for the people outside, where their body is anchoring them, is not neutral lighting for us. So it doesn't direct our gaze in the same way that the neutral lighting in where we're bodily located directs our gaze. Let's see what he does with this. Lighting and constancy of the illuminated thing, which is its correlate, depends directly upon our bodily situation. Then he has a weird example that I don't really want to read. But I like the phrase here. He says, we enter into its zone. So you bodily enter into a zone of lighting, and then it sets the background for you against which, or in terms of which, colors show up. This is when we start to get the phenomenon we were talking about yesterday, about how if you're in a room with yellow lighting set as your background, then the outside can look strikingly blue. But when you're outside, it doesn't seem to you that you're in this super blue, saturated blue place. It does at first, when you first go outside, because your perceptual system is set to the level of the lighting in the yellow room. So when you go outside, it's not really blue right now, it's more greenish. but it works better in the morning or when the sun is setting. But this is kind of green. It kind of looks pretty green for us out there. If we went out there, it would still hold this greenness to us because our lighting level is set. The normative background of our perception is set by this lighting. And so it shows up in a correlative way out there. But then once we get out there, it settles down and our perceptual system adjusts. Because our body is out there, it adjusts to that being the perceptual background. Let's see what he does with this on 324. Yeah, this is 324 in the second paragraph, 6 lines down. Lighting is in itself neither color nor even light. He must be saying éclairage is neither color nor even lumière, but I'm not sure, we'd have to read the French. Lighting is itself neither color nor an object of a light cone. It is prior to the distinction between colors and lights. And this is why it always tends to become neutral for us. The shadowy light in which we remain becomes so natural for us that it is no longer perceived as shadowy. So when the movie lights go down in the movie theater, at first it's super dark, but eventually, your eyes get used to it, as we say, and you can kind of reach over for the popcorn because you can see it. Electric lighting, which seems yellow to us when we first leave the daylight, soon ceases to have any definite color. And if some remnant of daylight penetrates into the room, it is this objectively neutral light that appears to us as tinted blue. I think all that's pretty clear. There's one more passage where he says it pretty clearly in the film essay that I quoted from earlier. When we turn on the lights at dusk, the electric light seems yellow. So if you come out, your house got dark and it's kind of got the blue of the outside. You switch on the lights, it looks really yellow at first because our level was bodily set to the bluish light, or what looked blue now, to the outdoor light. But a moment later, it tends to lose all definite color, becoming the background. Correlatively, the objects whose color was at first perceptually modified resume an appearance comparable to the one they had during the day. So the light withdraws again to be the neutral background. It guides our gaze rather than works as an object of our gaze. It helps us see the real colors or have a maximum grip on the color so that the color constancy phenomena function for us. I think that's it. I have one more quote it says to read on 325. This is just the top, our bodily settling into a certain colored milieu, along with the transposition of all color relations that it entails, is a bodily operation. I can only accomplish this by entering bodily into this new atmosphere, because my body is my general power of inhabiting all the world's milieus, and the key to all the transpositions and all the equivalences that keep the world constant. Thus, lighting is merely one moment in a complex structure whose other moments are the organization of the field, such as our body accomplishes it. And all right, we're back. All right, so it's kind of a mindful, all that, but the idea is that we're perceptually attuned to whole situations, that we're not perceptually attuned to analytical, isolated things or qualities, that we are attuned to real colors. That means we see constancy phenomena because we notice that the unevenly lit surfaces are bodily senses, that they're deviations from the real color. And we have a sense for how we would have to move our body in order to get a better look on the lighting. But all of that is his explanation of the constancy phenomena, of color constancy, but it only works because the lighting source is part of the perceptual spectacle, because that allows our body to set its level to what the background is for perception. He uses this word sets a level on the bottom of 324. Every color quality is mediated by a color function and is determined in relation to a level that is variable. The level is established, and along with it, all the color values that depend on it. So there's the body, there's the tendency toward maximum grip, there's the perception of the whole situation, including the lighting context, there's the way we take into account the color, the lighting as the background of our perception, and it doesn't figure for us as an object in our perception, and that explains how we have a perception of stable objects with stable properties. That's the picture. What do you think? I will give you the party line, so to speak. The party line is that the body's doing it because in that the body has a sense of what the maximum in richness and articulation would be. It has a sense of the maximum clarity. This is something that we talked about last time that so far is unexplained. But his postulation is that our body and our body schema carries with it a way of being familiar with shapes, sizes, and colors, so that it kind of knows. And when we say that it knows, we mean it draws us. It solicits us. We are motivated to the part of the wall where the lighting is better when we're trying to see what color it is. Or we are, when we're walking around and have a perspectival variation on the objects around us, we're stable. We have a sense of stability in the objects because our body is somehow tracking, has a sense for how the view we are seeing now deviates from a more optimal view. So that's what it means to say that the body knows. It means we have an experience of stable objects even though we have perspectival variation. It doesn't freak us out. And we have a sense, if we wanted to really see what shape the table was for some reason, or what shape the surface was, we know we have a bodily sense that we would have to come over here. How does that answer your question? Really, I'm not sure. I mean, I think Professor Noe would say something like this. That party line that I'm giving is still perhaps drawing too traditional of a distinction between the body and the mind. And really what we should do is think of the mind as embodied. And really we shouldn't cut off mentality and consciousness from embodiment. And we should say, yeah, the mind has played a role. The mind has a role to play, but the role that it plays is connected with how it's embodied. I don't know how to work that out, but that's what the party line is. Thanks. Anybody else want to say anything? Yeah. You must be right about that the constancy phenomena can still work to a certain extent, even if we're not, well, I'm just trying an experiment. There's the lighting source. I was trying to block it out of my view. But you're saying that, don't we still somehow take account of it and we still experience color constancy, even if the lighting source is not in our perceptual view? I think in this experiment, the answer is no. And if you did it, you would see that. In general, though, I'm not sure what else to say about that. In the movies, you do make a good point. It's always an artistic choice in the movies whether or not they actually display a lighting source or just keep it in the background. But when they keep it in the background, there's also all kinds of auxiliary lights that are shining to reveal certain colors in the frame, assuming it's a color movie, that there's all kinds of lighting apparatus around to draw attention to the face of the people. And if red is a particularly salient color in the narrative, they're bringing out the red and the coloring and the lighting that they're using. Something to think more about, though. Good question. I don't know what to say about it. How those cases work without the lighting, how those cases present convex and concave sense of shape without the lighting source being present. Well, his arguments here is how the lighting source reveals color, not how it reveals shape. And if those examples are about convex and concave and how we see one as one way and one as the other, it's a different kind of case. But I grant that this is kind of a punt. I mean, it was your question about how does this relate to the shape and the size issues. How does the lighting context relate to the shape and the size issues? And he doesn't say. And I don't know what to say. But I do have something else I wanted to share with you. Remember last time when I said, I might be wrong about this, but I think there's been experiments that show that the Mueller-Lyer illusion, this one, the susceptibility to the Mueller-Lyer illusion depends upon, or draws upon whether or not you're used to living in a world where there's a lot of right angles because of the architecture that you live in. I read this somewhere, and I said it in a way that I said I might be wrong about that. And so I did the research and I found it. And the first thing I have to say is that there is research that attempts to show this, but it doesn't establish anything conclusively. So there's a big book that came out called Influence of Culture on Visual Perception in 1966. And they did some experiments that tried to show that people, this is a funny phrase, they say people who live in a carpentered world, so a world where there's carpenters who build stuff at right angles, people who live in a carpentered world have a tendency to see acute angles as kind of deviations from the right angles. And that we're used to setting our sense of size, relative size, and distance according to the right angles that are in our built environment. And so that even when we look at an illusion like this, we're somehow adjusting our sense of how far away this one is and how close this one is according to the angles that they present. I don't know the details of that, but I wanted to let you know that it is a debate and people worry about it. And if you're curious about it, you can look up carpentered world hypothesis. You said something when I said that there was a dress that presents a different shade depending on if you're a morning person or an afternoon person. And I've been worrying about that because for a Merleau-Ponty, it must be whether or not you see it if in the morning or you see it in the afternoon after your level had been set in the morning, or how else would it work? I'm going to go on. All right, now we're at this strange phenomenon. We're going to go to the strange stuff about how the body and the world are correlated, even while the objects in the world are transcendent. And as I said before, I think this is his attempt to overcome a traditional dichotomy between idealism and realism. Idealism roughly being the view that, something about us constitutes reality. And realism being that whatever is there independently of us. And he's trying to thread a needle saying, well, it's both in some way. And at first in phenomenology perception, it sounds pretty far out. But I think there's a way to make it seem pretty plausible, actually. What I'm hoping for on his behalf is that this gives him some explanation of how the body schema knows all this stuff about sizes, shapes, and colors. Remember I gave you that quote the other day where he says, the body is a perceptual genius who knows more about the world than I do. So he reaches for these funny expressions when he doesn't have a better explanation. But I think he does, actually, and I want to try to build up to it. The first thing to say is another point. It's another point about the profound, deep holism of perceptual experience. That we don't perceive isolated qualities, we perceive whole things with their qualities. And he goes pretty far in making this claim, but he says on 326 at the bottom of the big paragraph, a color is never simply a color, but rather the color of a certain object. And the blue of a rug would not be the same blue if it were not a woolly blue. And earlier in the book, he said, imagine, the woolly red of a carpet and the shiny red of a fire engine. That they seem different to us because our perceptual system perceives as a whole. There's tactile qualities in the colors that we perceive. And there's tactile colors and there's tactile qualities and color qualities and sound. So when you're, I'm a musician, when you're recording with your band, you could say, my friend Greg's our recording engineer. Greg, the sound is too dark. We need to brighten the sound up on this release. You always say stuff like that in music. So it comes naturally to us to know what it means. Brighter means kind of has more treble. It kind of cuts through more. It hits you in a different way. The darker sound is murkier. It seeps into you. And you draw on these other kind of metaphors for talking about the sound. And this is Merleau-Ponty's point, that our perceptual openness is not of a pre-analyzed distinction between the different senses, but we have an intersensorial unity overall in our perceptual experience. I think this is connected to the bigger, weird points that he wants to make. Where he starts arguing on 331, there's a big break, and there is section B called the thing or the real, and the thing as a norm of perception. He's trying to overcome the dichotomy between realism and idealism. But along the way, we find him flipping back and forth between expressions that sound more idealistic, as though the body is constituting reality, constituting the thing. That reality has what he calls anthropological predicates. That's a phrase he uses. That sounds more idealistic, that we're putting something into what reality is. Then he flips back and he says that the real transcends us and has non-anthropological predicates. So I want to show him once or twice going in these different directions and then try to say how he puts them together. On 339, I'm jumping all the way to. At the very bottom of the page. This is the question he has. He lumps it in. And you can see the section title of this is over on 338. It's called "The Thing is Prior to Man," and scare quotes for some reason, but this is where he's arguing that there's something about things and reality that transcends us. And before that, around here, he's also arguing that we constitute it. But his question is at the bottom of 339. How might we simultaneously understand the thing, that the thing is the correlates of my knowing body, and that the thing denies this body? And his answer, again, is that somehow the thing and reality as a norm that we have a better or worse grasp on, or that the norm means we have a sense of deviation from the optimal. That when we think of the real colors or the real things as something we never actually fully get, but that we can always sense our deviation from. And that's because of the body schema and the tendency to maximum grip. Supposedly, this enables him to pull off this weird move that says things are both correlative to our body and somehow interdependent with us and transcendent of us. So yeah, then I'm jumping back to 332. Well, I'm going to read this and hope that we understand it. 3 or 4 lines down from the top. I perceive a thing because I have a field of existence, and because each phenomenon that appears polarizes my entire body as a system of perceptual powers towards it. I go through appearances, and I reach the real color or form when my experience is at its highest degree of clarity. So when we reach the closest to having the optimal grip, that's when we're closest to having the thing in its reality and as it's independent of us. But technically speaking, what he says here is in tension with what he says other places, where he says, I reach the real color when my experience gets this highest degree of clarity. At other points, he says the highest degree of clarity is something we never attain, but we always slightly deviate from. So he's not quite settled on how he wants to say this. but the idea is the one we've been chewing on the past couple of days, that we can sense a deviation from a clearer presentation of what we're perceiving. And the reality of what we're perceiving is what enables us to sense that deviation. Okay, skipping down a couple of lines. Let's see if we can make sense of this. These different appearances are, for me, appearances of a certain true spectacle, namely the one where the perceived configuration, for a sufficient clarity, reaches its maximum richness. That's the thing we've kept coming back to, that there's a point at which you're balancing, you get a good balance of seeing the whole of something and its details. But if the person backs up too much, you no longer get a sense for what their hairstyle is like or what their outfit's like. You can see more of their overall shape. If they get closer, you can see both their overall shape and the color of their eyes and outfit. So there's this trade-off between richness and clarity. And that's part of what the maximum grip story is oriented to. Then he says, I have visual objects because I have a visual field where richness and clarity are inversely related to each other. That's what I just said. And because these two demands, of which each taken separately goes to infinity, whatever that means, once reunited, determines within the perceptual process a certain point of maturity and maximum. Likewise, I call the experience of the thing or of reality my full coexistence with the phenomenon at my, it's so hard to read. I call the experience of reality. I'm skipping that inner part there. My full coexistence with the phenomenon at the moment when it would be in all relations at its maximum articulation, and the givens of the different senses are oriented towards this unique pole. I think that's another, just that part was kind of confusing, but it's a way of saying our perception is oriented toward this maximum richness and clarity, and we sense our deviation from it. And we know that the thing is real and dependent of us because it is guiding our sense of the different deviations and how we're falling short of a better grip on it and how we can improve our grip on it by moving in certain ways that it calls for from us. That's supposed to be a key to why things are both correlative to us and independent from us. Now we'll make the move from here into the more metaphysical, non-duality sounding claims on 334, the 3 lines down. This is an idealist sounding claim. The thing is constituted in the hold my body has on it. It is not first, but this is something, it's like the body is constituting, not the understanding. It's not at first a signification for the understanding, but it's a structure available for inspection by the body. And if we want to describe the real as such as it appears, we find it burdened with anthropological predicates. That's another way, that's his way of saying that our sense of reality is correlative to what our body can do, what it's sensitive to, the colors it's sensitive to, the shapes it can get in view. 334, oh yeah, then he gets, he's descending into his metaphysical speculation in the middle of the page. Every perception is a communication or a communion. The taking up or an accomplishment by us of an alien intention, or inversely, the accomplishment beyond our perceptual powers and a coupling of our body and things. I'm skipping some stuff because I'm conscious of the time going by. 338. Actually, this is pretty cool, where he says, then, what is reality? What can we say about the real when we've said that so far it's that in relation to which I can experience myself as deviating from? And here's his punchline on 337 in the middle of the page. The quote, real is the insurmountable plenitude. It is impossible to describe fully the color of a carpet without saying that it's a carpet or a woolen carpet, without implying in this color a certain tactile value, a certain weight, or a certain resistance to sound. That's the kind of stuff we were just saying. But the insurmountable plenitude is what I wanted to highlight there. That there's a sense of being able to explore more, of unlocking more details, depending on how you look, depending on how you listen, depending on the angle you take on it. So the real has something to do with this, what he calls infinite exploration on the next page, 338, at the bottom, 10 lines from the bottom of the main paragraph. The real lends itself to infinite exploration. It is inexhaustible. It all comes to a head on page 340, where he draws the conclusions that says this is neither realism nor idealism. And 340 in the middle of that paragraph. To live a thing is neither to coincide with it, that would be realism, nor to think it straight through, that would be a form of idealism, as though our concepts in our mind, our thinking, constitutes it. Thus, our problem becomes clear. The perceiving subject must, without leaving his place or point of view in the opacity of sensing, tend towards things whose key he does not hold in advance, in other words, which transcend him, which are different than him, and whose design or projection, he nevertheless carries within himself. He must open up to an absolute other that he prepares from deeper within himself. A far out thing to say, that the real is this infinitely explorable zone that's in the midst of which we are placed, but we still can unlock it. We had the project for it, or the design of it, built into our own body. We're somehow of a piece with it. And then he says then that the body schema, right over on the next page on 341 in the middle, to have a body is to possess a universal arrangement, a schema. This is a crazy thing to say, but this is, in a way, what his answer to the question we've been chewing. A schema of all perceptual developments and all intersensory correspondences beyond the segment of the world that we're actually perceiving. Thus, a thing is not actually given in perception. It is inwardly taken up by us, by the way our body is attuned to it, reconstituted and lived by us, insofar as it is linked to a world whose fundamental structures we carry within ourselves. Although the thing is lived by us, the thing is no less transcendent to our life. Okay, this is where we need to look at the handout that I gave you. Because it can sound like a wild, weird speculation that he was drinking too much or had too much mescaline and was speculating. But it's actually deeply a development of an earlier view he was pointing out when he was doing phenomenological reconstruction of psychological research and research on the organism and the organism's relationship to its environment. So I've put this quotation for you from his first book on the handout. And my argument here is that what he's saying here in a quasi-scientific language, do you need the handout? I think it's here. What he's saying here in a quasi-scientific language is actually a very plausible and now almost universally accepted understanding of how an organism is interrelated with its environmental niche. That if you look at the hummingbirds that fly around in your backyard, if you're lucky, you have them, what's relevant to them, the reality that they're sensitive to, their perceptual objects, is clearly correlative to the body that they have. The way that the flowers afford and beckon them to stick their beak in and drink the juice is a way of saying that their perceptual milieu, their Umwelt in the German word, you'll see this in these discussions, it's a German word for environment. Their environment is correlative to the body that they are and the evolutionary history of that body. It's actually not that weird of a claim. The contrast is to say, the world is just a bunch of objects and the animals are placed in it and they have to do a survival of the fittest adjusting to it. It's actually not like that. The organism is correlative with its environmental niche. They've co-evolved. The objects there are independent from the organism, but they're correlative to it. Yeah, what's your name? Luke. I like your question. Does the cobbler become a shoe? The cobbler is oriented to the shoe as an indispensable relation in light of which, or with relation to which, he is a cobbler. He doesn't become the shoe, but he depends on the shoe to be a cobbler. But I see what you're saying, because this is a way of saying that the shoe, in a sense, is independent of him, but it's co-defined with what he is. There would be no shoes without cobblers and people to wear them. And so, in that sense, the human environment does have the same structure. It's easier to see with the human environment because cobblers and shoes are clearly human relative. There's no shoes in themselves. Shoes are a product of human practices in human civilization. And the identity of being a cobbler is something that emerges in human civilization. But you can't be a cobbler in a world without shoes. So to be a cobbler is to be related to shoes. Yet, at the same time, the shoe is made out of something that is independent of the cobbler, that he has to have skills for bringing out what it's good for in terms of making shoes. So you see something like the same structure. Were you pointing in a different direction, or where were you going with that question? Yes. If I have time, I want to explain to you more about the point you're directing towards, because this is a radicalization of something Heidegger did in his book, Being in Time, where Heidegger talks about being in the world with hyphens, being dash in dash the dash world, and a way to say that human beings aren't separate from the world. We're intimately correlated with it. But the world he's talking about is the world of human objects like shoes and cell phones and bicycles. It's not a world of natural objects like Merleau-Ponty's talking about. So Merleau-Ponty, in a way, is saying there's a being in the world at the level of the natural organism and its relationship to its environment. It's not just that human identity is interdefined with cultural objects, like Heidegger says. It's that the human body is interdefined with the very natural world in which it finds itself. So this is the way Merleau-Ponty says it. Let's read it. Thus, the form of the excitant, or the perceptual stimulus, I put in brackets, the form of the perceptual stimulus is created by the organism itself, by its proper manner of offering itself to actions from the outside. Doubtless, in order to be, sorry for my typos, in order to be able to subsist, no, maybe it's fine. In order to be able to subsist, it must encounter a certain number of physical and chemical agents in its surroundings, things that are independent of it and have nothing to do with it per se. But it is the organism itself, according to the proper nature of its receptors, the threshold of its nerve centers, and the movements of its organs, which chooses the stimuli and the physical world to which it will be sensitive. The environment, or Umwelt, here he's quoting some Germans, the Umwelt emerges from the world through the actualization of the being of the organism. So the dogs are sensitive to smells that are just way out of the range of what's relevant to us. They have a different perceptual world. They have different stimuli, but the stimuli they pick up on aren't just out there indifferently. They are stimuli for the dog and the history of the dog interactions with its environment. The hummingbird has a sensitivity to an environmental world that is not relevant at all to us, except for aesthetic beauty and maybe good smells and for the eventual production of lemons, because the hummingbirds love the blossoms on the lemon tree, it turns out. But the perceptual stimulus that they get is correlative to their body and to what they are as an organism. I don't think it's as crazy of a sounding thing that he makes it sound in Phenomenology of Perception. And at the end of this handout, I put a quote from his last book, because he remained obsessed with this idea. And in the last book that he had, he was pushing it further and then pushing it more back into a bigger, weirder sounding ontological picture, where he says, We are not separate from the world. We're part of the same, or not organism, we're part of the same stuff. And he calls it the flesh. He's going through all this trouble in the tradition of Heidegger and Nietzsche before him to say, we need to get over the subject-object dichotomy. We can't think of ourselves as subjects independent from a world of objects. We need to look at ourselves and realize how intertwined we are with the world and with reality. That's why Heidegger called it being in the world. Merleau-Ponty uses Heidegger. He says, "Etre au monde," being at the world in this book. And all that stuff from the biological discussion he has feeds into this. But here he goes back into the metaphysical way of speaking. The look, or the gaze, or what it means to capture something in your visual perception. Then he has this funny phrases: envelops, palpates, espouses the visible things, as though it were in a relation of pre-established harmony with them. Sounds just like the above quote from biology. As though it knew them before knowing them. It moves in its own way with its abrupt and imperious style. And yet the views taken are not desultory. Every time I read that word, I don't know what it means, but I can explain it to you after I read the passage. The views taken are not desultory. I do not look at a chaos, but at things. So that finally one cannot say if it is the look or if it is the things that command, because it's the things that are beckoning the look. What is this prepossession of the visible? This art of interrogating it according to its own wishes, this inspired exegesis. So there he's just saying again that what we're attuned to perceptually is offering itself to us to be perceived. That we're in a correlative, intimate interrelation with the world that we find ourselves in. We're not a relation of detached subjects observing a world of objects in an analytical, scientific, intellectualist mode of being. We're being in the world. That's the punchline. How much time do we have? Cool. Well, I was going to give you a mini lecture on Heidegger, but I'm not going to be able to. But I gave it to you in response to Luke's question, kind of. I mean, Heidegger went to a certain degree to say what we are as human beings is intimately interdefined with the tools that we use and the social norms that define our relationship to those tools. And we can't define what Dasein is, that's his word for human being, independently of its relation to things. And Merleau-Ponty is just taking that a step further, saying we can't define what the human being is without talking about how its body is interdependent with the natural world. Heidegger left out the human body altogether in Being and Time. It appears in two fleeting places where he does a move that you can always afford yourself to. Unfortunately, this theme exceeds the scope of the current investigation. He says this product, the problematic of the body hides a whole problematic of its own, and we won't be discussing it here. Merleau-Ponty says we need to bring in the body, and the body itself shows a deep interrelation to the world that it's a part of. And it's not that weird, actually. Any questions or comments to what I've been saying? I think the move has got to be, and it's the same move that Heidegger tries. The move is got to be, we're questioning the very presupposition of the whole distinction and the whole debate between realism and idealism. And that once you look at the organism as tending towards the equilibrium with its environment, the equilibrium, which depends upon there being real things in deviation from which it senses itself. That's the picture, that if you start there with the involved, embodied agent coming to grips with its environment, then rather than starting with the picture of a mind, you have a different understanding of the whole framework that undermines the motivation for the traditional distinction between realism and idealism. Even though he's tempted to pull pieces from each of them, because he wants to say they both got something right, that the world is transcendent from us. It's different than us. And we know that because it's available for infinite exploration. We can never get it all in our grasp. And it's correlative to us. What we're related to, what we can sense, what we can even ask questions about, is totally interrelated with what our body can be attuned to. And in that sense, the perceptual world is constituted in a deep way by what our body schema allows and what the hummingbird's body schema allows. So in that sense, it's constituted by us at the same time. I can give you the party line, but I've already done it. I think, in a sense, you got to start to be seduced by the whole picture. And then you can work your way out from there, but it might not be fully coherent. Let's grant that. Thanks for having me. I put my email address on the handout if you want to email me and talk or say anything that you thought of in response to what we've been talking about the last couple of days. And I'll see you in the back of the room every now and then. Thanks.